Okay, so we're getting some responses to the questions. So one is that there's a concern that this would be an excuse to target organizing for protests, and food solidarity is being gatherings that are too large, um, which is definitely true. So
Yeah. I also really like what Margarita said. The ordinance is necessary. We're not coming at this. It's really important. I'm sorry, my name is Nick, by the way. I'm the other presenter. It's really important that we realize we're not coming at this from some kind of anti-science, anti-mask stance. We take COVID-19 extremely seriously. I myself am immunocompromised, and so I've been basically quarantining. Very seriously we take this. The problem, though, as Margarita and others have pointed out in the chat, is in the actual enforcement of the ordinance. We see some more comments in here. It's a continuation. Bailey says it's a continuation of this idea of personal responsibility in the face of a failed response on a part of the government at all levels. And I completely agree with that, Bailey. What an observation. We are in this situation because our government has failed to protect us. And now, rather than focus on community source solutions, this seems like the State College Borough wants to farm out what should have been higher levels of government's job to the police. And so that's an excellent comment there. It's a really good point.
yeah, I also wanted to highlight Dr. Henderson said the police is racialized in the first place. And so it's not that, COVID is affecting people of color disproportionately because of the racist society that we live in. And it does exacerbate this reality. That's totally true.
Yeah, and we're seeing some general, folks in the chat who are just uncomfortable with the idea of police enforcing it. Just like Dr. Henderson said, that this is something that we've already had existent in our system, in our society. It's systemic racism, and systemic inequalities and injustice. I want to make sure we know that we're not just talking about people of color who are going to be unfairly targeted by this. We're also talking about poor folks too, which there's a high percentage of poor folks here in the borough, in State College. And as Tiara said, the police are not enforcing the 6 feet away, which we're going to touch on just in a minute. But that's an excellent point as well, Tiara. The police, and like I said, I'll say this again in a minute, but the police have in other cities around the country have a high infection rate. And when they're interacting with citizens on a daily basis, we're just increasing the risk of transmission of infection. Yeah, and then Bree with the repeat offenses, I think that's a slippery slope issue right there. How are they going to follow up with these repeat offenses? These are excellent. Keep them coming, y'all. Thank you.
Oh, wow. So right. So they didn't even make the effort. So it seems like they didn't even make the effort to communicate this ordinance to everyone in the community.
That's extremely frustrating to me. and I'll touch on your comment in a second, Bailey. That's extremely frustrating to me because I've sat in on meetings with the borough talking about the necessity, or not the borough, with the county, I should say, talking about the necessity of making sure that these resources, like Margarita is saying, are being made in Spanish. They already told us that the county did. You would think the borough would follow along, but you're right. It should be just an automatic process, Margarita.
Okay, so let's just move on to the next question, which is related. Is do you think the ordinance will actually be effective in preventing the spread of COVID-19 in our community? And people sort of touched on this already, that the ordinance itself seems necessary, but the way it's enforced is the problem.
I can tell you myself, we just had exactly, April. We just had the first couple of days of Penn State students back. You know, my partner is a Grubhub driver, and she's been driving all over State College over the last couple of days, delivering food and reporting back on just how ineffective this masking ordinance has been in the first couple of days. That's another good point there, Bailey. Businesses are exempt. And like April said, this is just going to exacerbate already existing inequalities. We're going to get to hear from Bailey in a moment, but Bailey, do you want to unmute and explain a little bit what you're talking about there?
Yeah, as I understand it, businesses are exempt from the mask ordinance, meaning they don't have to, like people are allowed to be indoors in a business not wearing a mask. I can't remember the specific language in the ordinance that describes this, but essentially it like shows that this ordinance is not meant to, like April said, it's going to exacerbate these issues across the county where workers are not protected. My partner is working right now at a restaurant and she has to serve people all night not wearing masks. And so it's the idea that it's not enforceable in businesses is just, what is the point of this ordinance?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. It seems that they rushed to put something together without considering all the ramifications of it. And I really love what Dr. Henderson's saying in here. I read an article on statecollege.com today where they said, the first couple of days has passed and it's been okay. But a footnote noted that PICA is kicked off campus now, or kicked out of Penn State, or shut down again. And we all saw, I'm sure many of us saw the video that was circulating on social media of East Halls and that little celebration in a quad there. If those folks look differently, how do you think their response would have been? We've already seen examples of this throughout the history of State College.
Yeah, it really seemed like just like a superficial, thing that they could pass to sort of say, oh, well, we're bringing all the students back, but it's okay because we have this ordinance, without it really being effective. And without them considering, as Bailey and other people have mentioned, the people who are working in service jobs.
Yeah,
Okay, awesome. Thanks everyone for your responses. This has already been a super awesome discussion. And so now Nick's gonna take it away for the rest of the, I see we're getting some more.
Yeah, I want to honor what folks are saying in the chat.
Yes.
So, Gabrielle mentioned that we're not seeing Penn State students social distancing and wearing masks at all. I think I've seen the same thing. In fact, it's been mentioned that it seems like a lot of freshmen came here with the intent of going home. They haven't even unpacked yet. So they don't even think that Penn State's going to be open for very long. And it is not being enforced against these majority white students. But as Bailey pointed out, they knew this was going to happen. So, what is it? Yeah, I didn't know they put a poll out about that. However, that's crazy. So they completely did know that 20% of folks really took it seriously and 80% of folks did not. That is insane. And Tiara makes a really good point here that, when we look at the macrocosm of what we're dealing with as a country when it comes to COVID, we are already far down the hole. Okay, I have a friend that I used to work with in State College back in the day, whose wife works for the Navy and has been doing research on COVID-19 for the Navy, and he's been feeding me information in my inbox for months now. And he started telling me his tune shifted about a month ago, and he started saying, we need to stop. We need to get to the point where we are learning to live with this disease, instead of just putting together, piecemeal solutions to it. And Tiara brings up another really great point that I'm going to highlight a little bit more later. But in some places, we're not seeing this at State College, but in some places, there are actually anti-masking ordinance. As a Black man walking into a store with a mask on, especially if it's a store in Phillipsburg or somewhere else in the county. But if it's a store here in State College with a mask on, I already feel uncomfortable, and I already have to deal with a certain amount of attention, we'll say. But now you're subjecting people who are walking around the street without a mask to harassment because of the mask ordinance as well. Yeah. And Eugene makes a really good point too. How often, or what are the police going to do with apartment parties? And how are we going to see these things enforced? How are we going to see, this enforced differently at Beaver Hill as opposed to the Graduate? Are we going to see this enforced differently at, one of the newest high rises as opposed to Beaver Terrace or somewhere on campus? Yeah. But I am going to go ahead and move on. Tara, I'd love to explore what messages you put on social media. Okay. All right. Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not going to go out there wearing a mask and a sunglasses. That's for damn sure. Thank you, Tara. Yeah, I completely agree with you, Dr. Anderson. The university should be completely virtual. And I think that we're going to go completely virtual within the next week or so. Yeah, but, sure. and I think that the next slide says, why should we oppose the mask ordinance? I think we all have a really good grasp on this. This again is not an anti-science. This is not an anti-mask. This is not an anti-public health stance. I'll just say next slide, Allison. Next slide, please. Part of the reason we need to oppose this is, as we were talking about, this gives the police reason to harass people. They're going to target people of color, just like in New York. They're going to target the poor. And we've actually seen this in the past. Okay, there is historical evidence that this is what happens. In a smallpox outbreak in Milwaukee in 1894, health officials allowed the rich to stay home and they quarantine while they took the poor to the same hospital where they did not get the same kind of treatment. And a lot of the outbreak was localized on the South Side, which had a large immigrant population. We saw something similar in 1900 with the bubonic plague when it hit the Chinatown district of San Francisco. The police chief removed all of the white residents from Chinatown and quarantined the rest of the quarter to prevent anyone who was Chinese from leaving. It took a federal court to rule that this was not only was this response unconstitutional, but it was more likely to spread the disease than to contain it, because it could find all the people, both healthy and sick, together in small areas. And then we saw it again in 1901. Boston began to face a smallpox epidemic. And what we see from clinical records, we see that 7% of the admitted patients were Black, but 49% were immigrants. Black folks made up just 2% of the Boston population at the time, and immigrants only made up 35%. So we're seeing racial iniquities right there already. And by mid-November, the Board of Health had assembled virus squads, which consisted of physicians and police traveling out in the community together in order to forcibly vaccinate people. If that doesn't sound like a nightmare, I don't know what does. But this is, of course, distant in the past. What's happening today? We're already seeing this again. We talked a little bit about what's happening in New York. In Chicago, we had to have organizers, community organizers, write a letter to the police department superintendent because asking them to, quote unquote, stop terrorizing the West Side Black communities. We saw it in New Orleans as well, where the police were issuing arrest warrants for Black organizers of a church celebration. You might have seen this on social media. There was a regular church celebration that happens every year. They went ahead and held it despite being warned not to. Okay, so the 2 Black organizers of that church celebration were, they issued warrants for them. However, in the news in the same time period was this white pastor who continued to hold mega church communities, congregations, I should say, and they didn't even bother him. They actually waited for him and just gave him a warning. So we're already starting to see a difference in the way in which police are handling this based on race. And it also gives other folks like our barbecue Beckies and the like more reason to call police and their Black and brown neighbors, like we said. So, and we've seen this. This is, again, like has been mentioned in the chat, this is nothing new. COVID-19 is really exposing some of the issues that the United States and our country and our community have had to deal with. Okay, in the article I referenced earlier, there was a one-line piece that really took me back. The police department mentioned it. They had received multiple calls from folks calling the police on their neighbors for failure to obey the ordinance. Now, they said that all of this was peaceful at this point in time, but how long will that remain so? And then, of course, increase in police contact is tied to declining physical and mental health. I really, we have not been hit just as hard as other places in this country and other places in the state. However, we have been hit. One thing that we've seen is that when someone is infected by COVID, their privacy is ultimately respected. So I highly doubt we would know if a police officer had been tested for COVID. We do know, however, looking at other places, that the police have some of the highest infection rates of any occupation nationwide. In New York City, 1 in 6 officers is sick or quarantined. In Detroit, 1 in 5 officers is sick or quarantined, including the chief of police. In Baltimore, over 500 officers have been quarantined. Now, again, we may not be seeing this in State College at this moment, but when you give police more reason to interact with the general public, and again, as someone mentioned in the chat earlier, when they're not observing that 6 feet distance, which they're not going to, when we set them up in a position where they can effectively stop and frisk whoever they want based on whether you're wearing a mask or not, we're going to increase the murder rate. And again, it's also tied to a declining physical and mental health. Next slide, please. We already know a little bit about how well this police force deals with mental health calls. As this crisis goes on, we are seeing more and more mental health calls, and the local police has a terrible history. We know about the tragic murder of Osazi. That's part of the reason we are here, but that's not the only thing that's happened here. The police in State College have a terrible history of dealing with folks with mental health. And we already know the statistic. People with untreated mental health needs are 16 times more likely to be killed by police. Do you know when a lot of mental health issues surface in a person's life? When they go away to college for the first time. So what does that say? What are we setting up our students and our community to deal with? So as the next slide said, some other issues, this will lead to even more incarceration. So I'm a criminal justice reform activist. I was look back to the last slide. I'm sorry, Allison. I'm a criminal justice reform activist. I currently work with the Abolitionist Law Center. I've worked with the ACLU of Pennsylvania. I'm also formerly incarcerated. I've been studying the criminal justice system of Pennsylvania for a number of years now. If you don't know it, we are really bad. Pennsylvania is the 5th most incarcerated place in the country. 5th most, with the highest rate of incarceration in the Northeast. There might be a slide on this later, I forget. With the highest rate of incarceration in the Northeast. Oh yeah, there it is. We incarcerate 375 people per 100,000. In Pennsylvania, Black folks are 9 times more likely to be incarcerated than white folks. Latinx folks are 3 times more likely to be incarcerated than white folks. And that's just as a state as a whole. A little tidbit. Pittsburgh has one of the worst racial disparities in the entire world. Black folks are 16 times more likely to be incarcerated in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, than in the rest of than white folks. And again, Pennsylvania has the 5th highest incarcerated population in the country. So what happens when you release the police to enforce mask ordinance, or like I said, effectively choose who to stop and frisk on the streets based on whether you're wearing a mask or not, you're going to see increased arrests. The article I'm referencing, or I referenced earlier, even mentioned that there were several arrests for possession of marijuana. There were several arrests for public drunkenness. That possession of marijuana charge, I'm really curious, and I'm sure we can go in the docket to find out whether that person was stopped because of a mask or not. We're going to see that kind of stuff, and people's Fourth Amendment rights are going to be put to the test as a result of this ordinance. Further, more incarceration. When you have that $300 fine, if you can't pay that fine, what happens? You end up going back in front of the court. You end up being held in contempt of court. Oftentimes, the remedy for that is probation. State College, Center County, has one of the highest rates of probation and parole in the entire state. I can tell you from personal experience that our county jail here is filled to the brim with probation and parole violators. We're not talking about people who are committing new crimes. Yes, some of them are, but the vast majority of folks who are currently incarcerated in Center County Correctional Facility are there for what we call technical violations, which are not new crimes. Failure to pay a fine, that is a technical violation. It will get you reincarcerated. I can tell you from personal experience that reincarceration can last anywhere from 30 days to 6 months. You're in jail for 3 days, guess what? You lose your job, you may lose your home, you may lose if you're taking care of loved ones. Obviously, this just exacerbates what's already a problem in our community. If you count the college kids, obviously take this number with a grain of salt. But if you count the college kids in 2017, the poverty rate in state college was 44%. Without them, it's something around 26%, but that's still higher than the average in the state. We have a lot of hidden poverty in this town, and all we're doing now is criminalizing poverty. So, next slide, please. What should we do? What can we do instead? I'm a big fan of not just complaining, but knowing who to complain to and offering solutions at the same time. So we've got a couple discussion questions. I'd love to hear from the audience. What are some other, next slide, please. What are some other ways we could educate people on the importance of wearing masks without getting police involved? And I'll give folks a moment. Yeah, Dr. Anderson. And I'm going to catch up on some of the comments. And I'll apologize for my wife on the phone in the background in another meeting. Yeah, that probation and parole numbers are astonishing. And they're actually really hard to find. I'll tell you, Dr. Henderson, when you look and see the percentage of state colleges' budget spent on the carceral system or the Center County's budget, I bet you'll be surprised too. I mean, we spend far too much money on a system, and it's really just a revolving door. So what are we having here? Does anyone have any ideas about what we could do instead? It's fine. If you don't, I'll continue. I'll go on to the next question. The next question as well is, what we're saying is we should, yes, that's exactly right, Emily. Not shaming or fining them, opening dialogue to give info, correct misconceptions, building trust relationship. Like Andrew said, we need honest conversation coming from a place of care, not shame and anger. The idea is we need to persuade people. Yes, pamphlets are great. We need to persuade people. We need to convince people that this is in their best interests. We need to educate people. There's a whole lot of misinformation that's flowing around about this virus. You know, a lot of folks focus on the death rate, but what I found very illuminating is focusing on hospitalization rate and long-term effects. You know, when we educate folks about those issues, then their attitude starts to change. But as long as folks are focusing purely on a death rate, then a lot of things get lost in translation. And so what we're positing is, yes, we should have honest conversations. We should not shame or fine them. We should open dialogue. We should actually go a step further and divest funding from the state college police force into a community organization that can go and educate and convince folks on wearing masks and the importance of doing so. Yes, the divest, defund. I agree. We'll talk about defund and abolish tomorrow, Andrew. Okay, I'm leading that conversation. I'm part of that conversation tomorrow. So come join us tomorrow for our programming, where we're going to talk a little bit about defunding and abolishing the police and differences and whatnot. Please, I hope to see you there. But okay, we're actually seeing this community organization idea work in other areas. In Chicago, they had 200 non-police street outreach workers who were already involved in street outreach to prevent gun violence. They declared them essential workers, equipped them with masks, informations, and pamphlets, and sent them door to door. It's something we can do here. And like April said, inform people as part of a broader mutual. I love that. It's part of a broader mutual aid infrastructure, food solidarity, bringing folks in through that community-oriented organizing. And I really hope that this conversation that we're having here can be the start of getting folks to kind of go out and help us all do this together. That's such an excellent point, April. We should have an end goal to this, and it should be something that brings our community closer together instead of pushing us further apart. Ooh, mask stations. Okay, so Jess Kim says mask stations. Instead of punishing people who aren't wearing masks, have stations where people can get masks for free. I like that, and it's similar. You know, I mean, if you think about it, they're gonna have to pay the police to patrol the streets. They're gonna have to pay them overtime. The police are handing out masks. Masks are expensive. They have to pay for those masks. Why not partner with a community organization that can make masks and educate folks door to door and use that money that you're paying the police for overtime, if we don't just defund them even more than the exorbitant amount their salary already is, or their budget already is. Yeah, and I'm sure we could find out, we could figure out logistics for this, Jess. I completely agree with you. That's a great idea. What we've seen in France is what we should have seen here in the United States from the jump. France is guaranteeing up to 80% of wages for workers. In Singapore, state and local governments are going around handing out masks to folks. And, you know, I actually got a email. Yeah, and I mean, these are all ideas that can definitely work, you know. Can you get the next slide, please? Pointed out a little bit about the budget numbers earlier. This is what the State College 2020 borough budget looks like before this mask ordinance, before any money from the CARES Act comes in, because it hasn't actually arrived yet. Before any of this stuff comes, we've got 38% of our budget goes towards police. By far the largest swath of budget. And honestly, folks, this is on the smaller end of budgets for police, but 38% of our budget goes towards police. This is one of the safest places I have ever lived. So, I mean, I'm not saying it's ultimately safe. There's obviously issues here in State College, especially for certain folks. But having been someone who's traveled all over the country and all over the state, this is one of the safest places. Yes, and Bailey's right. You know, this 38% of the budget that goes towards police. Can we shift some of that over into regional programs or public works? You know, can we shift? There it is. Can we shift some of that over into, you know, other information? Check this out. I got an email from I'm gonna leave his name out of it, from an unnamed politician. Okay, where he figured out how much money the county's gonna get. The county's gonna get $13 million from the federal government for COVID-19. We could totally take some of this money and out of that $13 million, that gets split up into the smaller municipalities. So the borough is going to get a large amount of money. I think the State College boroughs should be receiving approximately $385,000. Bellefonte will be getting $64,000. Ferguson will be getting $182,000. I can tell you, having built budgets and run campaigns before, that you give me $100,000 and I can have this borough. I can have a community organization in this borough handing out masks for free and going door to door and educating folks. I'm sure there's other money that other places this needs to go to, but at 38% of the police budget, we need to fund, put the money towards supporting people staying home. Next slide, please. We need to pay people to stay home. Yeah, I thought you might enjoy that, Bailey. We need to pay people to stay home. We need to educate people on the importance of wearing masks and social distancing, and we need to provide masks to the public for free. My son has just started school again. He goes to Delta. He's doing the half and half partial days, and we've been buying masks for him, and it's getting expensive. You know, we need to hold our leaders accountable, like Bailey said, for not providing this kind of public option. Now, so this I hope this has given y'all a great synopsis. Would anyone like to have? Is there any comments or anyone like to have the last word on this? This mask ordinance is obviously problematic, deeply problematic. Part of the reason why it's problematic is because they built it with the idea that the police will enforce it. We need to put pressure on them, and we need to get them to divest or defund this effort from the police and this effort from the police into community organizations and other efforts to make sure that they're able to do what 4CR did. Like Becky said, 4CR did when folks got sick who needed to work, they raised money and allowed them to stay home. We need to be solid. We need community solidarity with our council members, and we need them to back us up on this. So with that said, thank you so much. This is why we need to oppose the State College mask ordinance. Stick around. There are other, next slide, please. There are other ways in which there are other folks who are also working on similar efforts, and I wanted to highlight some of this. We've already mentioned a little bit about 4CR in the chat. There's also the Coalition for Just University, and we've got Bailey here from the Coalition of Graduate Employees to talk a little bit about that effort, and then we're going to leave you off today with an actual action step, because we can talk about it, we can talk about it all we want, but we got to be about it. So let me shut up and introduce and come on in, Bailey. Unmute yourself and tell us what you're about.
Sure, I prepared a speech, but I don't know if that's the vibe we're going for, but I'll just go ahead and read it. Hello, everyone. I want to begin by thanking the 320 Coalition for inviting the Coalition of Graduate Employees to speak at this event. CGE stands firmly in support of the work 320 does, and we will continue to support them in their fight for racial justice and equity in Center County. Penn State keeps trying to pass the blame onto students for the results of negligent policies Penn State has passed. When students were recorded gathered outside of East Hall, Eric Barron released a statement shaming students. When 20% of students reported months ago that they would not wear a mask in class, Penn State ignored it and launched a hashtag instead of increasing mandatory testing capacity. PSU's disdain for students is clear. These disciplinary responses must be identified for what they are: a failed and transparent attempt to absolve university officials of the responsibility of bringing students back to campus in the middle of a global pandemic. What else did administration expect? They must have known students would behave this way. We know that they did. Penn State's own poll found 20% of students said that they wouldn't wear a mask to class. We must hold Penn State responsible for ignoring these facts rather than adequately adjusting their plans to protect us all. Administration even went so far as to draft a compact that included language understood by several legal scholars to be an attempt at a liability waiver, despite Penn State's insistence that it wasn't. After widespread outcry, they finally decided to alter the language to read, "Even with the mitigation steps taken by Penn State and my compliance with this compact, I acknowledge that Penn State cannot prevent the risks of exposure to COVID-19 that may result from attending Penn State, participating in Penn State activities." This is still problematic, as it's still an attempt to absolve Penn State of their responsibility, and even with this change, Penn State stated, well, 70,000 students already signed, so we don't really see the issue, which ignores the coercive decision to restrict access to the main university portal. Some students were even unable to schedule telehealth appointments without accepting this compact. This tactic of blaming students is far from the only issue with administration. Penn State's plans are woefully inadequate in the extreme. They have not released statistical models to back up their testing plan, which only call for 30% pre-arrival testing and testing 1% of the population every day. This is in stark contrast with other universities like the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, which planned to test 100% of incoming students and every student that set foot on campus on average twice a week. This prompted the Coalition for a Just University, Eliza, hey, a campus group initially made of faculty, but growing to include graduate workers and staff, to release results from their own simulations carried out by Penn State faculty that showed, given Penn State's testing plan, we could expect several student deaths and thousands of infections by Thanksgiving. Penn State is putting our lives at stake. Penn State's plans will also have a disproportionate effect on Black folks and other people of color, as well as disproportionately affect poorer folks. Instead of writing a statement on my own on this topic, I wanted to read a portion of the statement Dr. Cynthia Young, Department Head of African American Studies, included at CGE's most recent protest. Quote, "This global pandemic has hit many communities hard, but it has hit hardest among essential workers like you, graduate workers, a disproportionate number of whom are Black, Latinx, or Afro-Latinx. These racial and ethnic groups are 3 times as likely as whites to contract COVID-19 and twice as likely as whites to die when they do. Why is this so? Because they are disproportionately in the ranks of low-wage essential workers, and in this country, mortality rates and health outcomes directly correlate to income and wealth. Black and brown people are more likely to suffer during this pandemic because they work essential jobs in grocery stores and gas stations, nursing homes and hospitals, meat packing plants and factory farms where they cannot socially distance or rely upon access to PPE. Essential workers are more likely to live in crowded, substandard housing and use public transportation, increasing their risk of exposure. Wearing a mask or socially distancing are luxuries that many essential workers simply do not have. In fact, meat processing plants have been deemed essential industries by the Trump administration precisely so that workers cannot refuse to work until PPE and safety protocols are in place. It does not have to be this way. It should not have to be this way. Public health is not a zero-sum game where some must die so that others can live. In the face of a cruel and inept public health response, essential workers like graduate workers must be absolutely certain that your employer is not risking your safety in the name of profit or professionalism. Only you, CGE, can determine whether the university's plan to reopen protects you. Until you are satisfied that it does, I stand with you and urge the university to collaborate with you and all essential workers to ensure that we can research and teach without risking our students, our health, and our very lives." So these powerful words by Dr. Young highlight what we know to be true. Those exploited by white supremacy and economic injustice are increasingly likely to get sick, to die, and to be deemed a casualty of business as usual. CGE will continue to pressure the university for our 2 most recently codified demands: online instruction immediately and COVID justice, with all the myriad things included under that umbrella. We are asking any and all to join us on Labor Day, September 7th, to demand the university respect us as workers and listen to our health and safety concerns. Thank you. Sorry for the long statement.
No, that was awesome.
Yes, I completely agree. That was great. Thank you so much, Bailey. I mean, and as you see, this is another part of what we're dealing with as a community. I've lived here for close to 20 years, most of the last 20 years, and there's always been this town versus gown thing, okay? But I consider myself squarely in between that. We are all one community, and we need to stand in solidarity with what Bailey and the Coalition for Just University, Coalition for CGE is doing, as well as with 4CR and 320, and what we need as a total community, not as State College versus Penn State. So thank you so much once again for coming in and letting us know about some of the work that y'all are working on. And we look forward to continuing to work together to do the right thing by this crisis. So next slide. Again, we've got to do something. First off, let me point out that in the chat, you're going to see a link to the Facebook event that was just mentioned. So please go there. We hope to see you there. I will be there, provided I don't have to work or have class myself. And, you know, next we need to actually take action. So what we did was we gathered all of the email addresses for the borough council members and for Penn State. The important ones for Penn State, and we drafted an email that you're free to use. Allison, did you want to put that stuff in the chat?
Yeah, I'm working on it. Sorry, one second.
Word. Okay, just making sure I can't see it, so we're not trying to rush you.
Yeah.
Not trying to rush you. But yeah, and so we'll post all that information in the chat here in just a moment. Okay, and it'll also likely be posted on we'll try to get it posted on the Facebook page as well for those folks who may not be able to see chat or you know don't want to do it right now. But it's important that while you're on this computer call with us, why don't you copy and paste this? I'll read it aloud. To whom it may concern, my name is blank and I'm a State College Borough resident. Feel free to put whatever you want there, okay, if you're not a State College Borough resident. If you live on the campus. Urging you to put harm reduction before punishment. The State College Police Department is not a public health institution and should not be relied upon to enforce a mask ordinance. And in fact, studies show that during a pandemic, it is essential that police services step back. I urge you to divest from the police force and invest in public services that can help our community get through this crisis. We ask that you reduce or eliminate the fine for noncompliance and invest in community organizations that can provide free masks and focus, oh no, I lost it, and focus on educating the public about the importance of social distancing and wearing masks instead of on increased police presence on our streets and our neighborhoods. Thank you. Of course, feel free to change that as it makes sense to you. This is just to kind of to get you started. But if you could just please copy and paste that into your email right now, and then BCC or CC all of these email addresses. It's important that we get this word out. We need them to know that we're paying attention, that we care, and it's not just a few of us. And feel free to share this information. Feel free to get your friends to. If everyone on this call got 5 of their friends to email these folks, I think it would really make some noise. Yeah, you should be able to just to paste them in your to field on your email address, and it should all go. It should automatically separate them with commas and stuff. Did I understand the question?
Yeah, it's just the names are also there. I think they just want just email addresses. So yeah, I can fix that. 1 second.
Okay, my bad.
I just wanted everyone to know who they were emailing. Thought that was important, but yeah.
Absolutely, April. We're wrapping up right now. Give folks a chance to do this email, and we'll definitely welcome 4CR's mutual aid group to make a statement before we wrap this up. Once we get these email addresses repasted in here, we'll give folks like another minute. We got about 6 minutes before 6 o'clock. I don't like to go over. Actually, I have another meeting to run to. But once again, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that you'll join us for the rest of the actions. We'll have a flyer up here in a moment so you can see, but we've got actions planned this entire week long. And pay attention. There's, like I said, I work for a statewide organization called the Abolitionist Law Center. We've got a lot of things going on too on a statewide level. You know, there are a lot of folks who are activated right now. I've never been more excited than I am as an activist to be working in this area, because we are seeing some real movement on things I wasn't sure I'd see in my lifetime. So, yeah, this is a good time. And did I get the name right, Andrew? Did 4CR want to make a statement?
Yeah, apparently I've been voluntold by April that I'm speaking. Oh, there you go. Sorry for throwing you into the spotlight. I just got the message. So on a more serious note, 4CR is a mutual aid group. And one of the important points of mutual aid is the abolition of all unjust hierarchy, be it racial, economic, anything along those lines. And by definition is an anti-racist action. I want it to be known that we stand in solidarity with every last member of the community in this fight here. And one of the things we're thinking about doing now, based on these conversations that have come up today, is we will work towards distributing reusable and disposable masks in the community at all actions that we take part in, more actively than we have in the past. We've always had them there and offered them if people were missing them, but we will make an effort to have somebody out handing out masks, somebody who feels comfortable putting themselves at that risk. That's all.
That's excellent. You know, I full disclosure, I spent a couple months at the beginning of this year in jail. Long story. If you reach out to me outside of this, I'll explain to you. It's a little bit of political retribution. I hate Josh Shapiro. Anyway, but when I got home, I was introduced to some folks from 4CR, and I am stunned. Y'all have done some great work, and I'm really, really, really grateful for the way that all of you folks and everyone who's on this call and in these organizations have stepped up in this time of need. All right, we're going to wrap this up here. We've got a week's worth of programming here. Like I mentioned, tomorrow we're having a conversation. So the first 3 days, yesterday, today, and tomorrow are all about education. Tomorrow we're talking about the difference between defunding the police and abolishing the police. What does that mean? What will a world like without police look like? What does defunding the police look like? On Thursday, we'll do our Thursday, Friday, Saturday, the actual activations. We'll be doing a phone, email, fax, zap, and event with the Black Caucus. On Friday, there's actually a march in Washington, our March on Washington that we'll be tuning in live to. And then Saturday, we'll be taking to the streets ourselves. Well, you will be, I will not be, but you'll be taking to the streets ourselves, a direct action. And all week, however, we are looking for a logo for the 320 Coalition, okay? So there is a logo competition. Details we found on a Facebook page. There's a prize for the logo competition. Help us decide how we're going to brand ourselves moving forward. So tomorrow, defund, and abolish the police. It's tomorrow at 7 p.m. The Zoom link will be on the Facebook or stream live to our page. And as always, thank you all for coming. Let's take a moment of silence here for Jacob Blake. All right, thanks everyone. Justice for Jacob Blake, Black Lives Matters. Thank you once again for attending. We hope to see you tomorrow.
Bye, everyone.